Guten Tag, Econ. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Liniger, me. Let's make history today as we jaw over our Unit 2 review video over microeconomics. This is concepts 7 through 9. We'll finish up microeconomics. But first, let's do our daily punishment. To the guy who invented zero, thanks for nothing. All right, so first we're going to go over a little review. You do need to remember how to do consumer surplus and producer surplus. We went over this in the last review video, but you should know consumer surplus, producer surplus. It equals total surplus, social surplus, community surplus. It has a couple different names. The goal of economics, some of the micro goals of economics is to achieve allocative efficiency. This is the ideal combination of goods and services in a society. This is where quantity demand equals quantity supply, the equilibrium. This will lead to the greatest social surplus, community surplus. You can have failures of allocative efficiency. Some of the examples of failures we're going to talk about for today. A lot of today is about failures. I mean, that really is the whole video about market failures. And for that, you'll get like a lower consumer surplus, a greater producer surplus, or vice versa, and a welfare loss. We're going to first talk about indirect tax. Indirect tax is, and when we're talking about taxes, we're talking about this from the microeconomics perspective. This is placed upon the selling of a price, on the price of a product, so it raises the firm's cost, and it will shift the supply curve to the left based on the amount of the tax. This will also impact consumers. There's two different types of taxes. We have a fixed tax, so this would be like a $2 tax on a pack of cigarettes, and a ad valorem tax. This is a percentage tax, like a 20% sales tax on all alcohol purchases. These are how they look. If you look at a specific tax right here, the lines are still parallel to each other. For a ad valorem tax, it is going to be more elastic, and the percentage will become higher at higher prices. Possible reasons for taxation: to earn government revenue, to support firms, to support households on low incomes with the money for government programs, to influence the level of production, to like try to punish demerit goods, to influence the level of consumption, like I said, punishing demerit goods, to correct market failure, and to promote equity. Here we have the tax right here. The tax box is a little bit messed up, but I've showed you this graph before. Just remember, when you're making the tax box for the S tax, the intersection line is S tax and D. Then you go down. That will create a box. The line right here is going to be PC, for price consumers have to pay for the tax. The little dash mark right here will be PP. This is PE. This right here will be the deadweight. I should actually show you on the thing for tax. This right here is where they intersect. This will be PC, the price consumers pay. PE. This right here, for when you just do a downward dash, will be PP. This will be the deadweight loss. And this is the tax graph. This right here is the consumer index, and this is the producer index. Just going on with another graph. If you look at this right here, the tax box will take away from the consumer and producer surplus. There is also the triangle, like I mentioned, that is lost due to welfare loss. Make sure you are looking at this graph and you're labeling all the components. And like I said right here, just like fully labeled example, this right here has the box. As you see, intersection, go down right here, it creates a nice little deadweight loss, PC, PP, PE, that creates a rectangle, consumer indies, producer indies. Summary of indirect tax. The price will become increased. The quantity will become decreased. The government will get an increase in revenue. That's the tax box. The producers will get a decrease in revenue. Consumers will have to spend more. The community welfare will decrease, and this is an allocative inefficiency. But just because it's an allocative inefficiency does not mean necessarily it's the wrong decision. It might be creating a market failure, like an externality. We're next going to talk about subsidies. Subsidies will be a rightward shift of supply. It'll be S sub. It's the amount of money paid by the government to a firm per unit of output. This can be to lower the price of essential goods, to guarantee the supply of products that the government thinks are necessity, like merit goods, and to enable producers to compete with overseas trade. This is protectionism. We're still using the micrograph, so do not you dare do a free trade diagram with this. This is just from the microeconomics perspective. So if a subsidy is granted to a firm for the product will shift vertically downwards to the amount of the subsidy because it reduces the cost of production for the firm, and more will be supplied at prices. Not all the subsidy will be passed on to the consumer. Some will be retained by the producer. Percentage subsidies are rare, so we mostly look at specific ones. This right here is the subsidy. Again, the box is just a little kind of weird right now. The way this works is you go to S sub, where S sub meets demand. You do a dash mark up. That will make a little triangle. And then you go to the left. That will be PP, where the intersection is. That's PP. Then we have PE right here. It will create a nice little subsidy box. We'll have the consumer's gain on bottom, the producer's gain on top, and we'll have the deadweight loss right here. It's just important to know how to make this graph. Here's a cute example of it right here. As you saw, I just did the same thing. You go to where the S sub is, you move up, you go to the left, same thing right here. It creates a rectangle, and you have the deadweight and the two gains. And like I said, this shows this again. Some of the effects of a subsidy, evaluating it. The opportunity cost of government spending on the subsidy. There's opportunity cost because the government is spending revenue in terms of other alternative goods that they could be spending the money on. You have to think about whether the subsidy will allow firms to become efficient or whether they're going to become more inefficient if they do not have to compete with foreign producers in a free market. Although subsidy does allow consumers to buy goods at a lower cost, they also may be the taxpayers who are funding the subsidy. So you are going to be charged in taxes. And what damage does this do to foreign producers who are receiving subsidies, who are not receiving subsidies from their government? It does have an international aspect, which we'll talk about when we get to Unit 4. So overall impact of subsidies, the price will become decreased, the quantity will become increased. It is going to lead to an increase in government spending, so increase in the budget deficit. Producers will get more revenue. Consumers will spend less. The community welfare, however, will decrease, and this is an allocative inefficiency. Next, we're going to talk about price controls. First thing we're going to talk about is a price ceiling. A price ceiling is when the government sets a maximum price for a good or service, usually for essential goods, like affordable housing. In like New York, they used to do rent control for price ceilings for apartments. You couldn't charge more. They had set a maximum price for how much you can charge. And they do this, or they have done this and sometimes for low-cost food for maximum price. Recently, what's happening in Gaza with the Palestinians, the government in charge in there has done a price ceiling because there's been overcharging for food and medicine. So that's a more recent example of price ceiling. When you draw a price ceiling, you put a horizontal line below the equilibrium, label it price ceiling, P max. This is the quantity supplied. This is the quantity demand. It really doesn't matter if you do Q1 or whatever. It really isn't that big of a deal. But what you see here is that the quantity demand is greater than the quantity supply. So because of this, we are going to have a shortage. So it leads to a shortage. It's going to generate a rationing problem. It will lead to creation of illegal black markets. and it's going to eliminate allocative efficiency. You could just look right here and you can see the consumer and producer surplus are completely different. You just go to Q1, you do little dash marks up. It's going to create a new consumer surplus. Producer surplus is where the price ceiling is, and we have a huge welfare loss. Next up is price floor. A price floor is when the government sets a minimum price for a service, like minimum wage. And this will be a horizontal line above the equilibrium price. For a price floor, it will lead to a surplus, because if you look right here, the quantity supplied is going to be greater than the quantity demand. For minimum wage, there's going to be more workers than there's going to be more supply of workers, and there will be demand for hiring workers. We do the same thing right here. We do the little dash marks down. This will create the welfare loss. This will be the consumer surplus, and this will be the producer surplus. For price floors, it will lead to parallel black markets. The government will need to dispose of surplus. It's allocatively inefficient, and it will lead to welfare loss, which is also known as deadweight loss. So let's talk about other types of market failure. Other types of market failure are lack of public goods. Public goods are goods that would not be provided at all in a free market. Some of these things, so since they wouldn't be provided in the free market, the government does provide them. National defense, public parks. Public goods are both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Non-excludable means it's impossible to stop other people from consuming it once it's been provided. And non-rivalrous means that one person does it, it does not affect another person. Governments do try to reduce market failure by providing public goods, usually by taxing the public. And we are going to talk about types of goods at the very end of this. Next thing is undersupply of merit goods. Merit goods are goods that will be underprovided by the market, and because of this will be underconsumed. All public goods are merit goods for the most part. Government will try to increase the supply of merit goods by subsidizing them. We can also have an oversupply of demerit goods. In a free market system, we don't necessarily regulate demerit goods. Demerit goods are goods that will be overprovided by the market because they will be overconsumed. Cigarettes, alcohol, hard drugs. Governments should try to decrease the supply of said goods by making them illegal or placing a tax on them. In doing so, however, they do create a black market for these goods, which increases their value, which will in turn create more incentive to supply them. The last thing is externalities. Externalities is another example of a market failure, which is what we're going to be talking about for a little bit. An externality occurs when the production or consumption of a good or service has an effect upon a third party. If it's a harmful effect, we call this negative externality. There is an external cost that must be added to the private cost of the producer or consumer to reflect the full cost of society. If the effect is beneficial, we call it a positive externality. There has been an external benefit to add to the private benefits of the producer or consumer. So just to get some terminology, you should know marginal private cost. This is the cost for firms to produce an additional unit of service. Marginal social cost. This is the cost, the total cost to society when an additional unit of goods is produced. MSC includes MPC. We have the marginal private benefit. This is the benefit to consumers of consuming an additional unit of good. Marginal social benefit is the total benefit to society when an additional unit of a good or service is consumed. Our goal is to achieve optimal social quantity. That's where MSC equals MSB, where overall consumption and production maximizes welfare of society. So we're going to first start talking about positive externalities. We'll do something a little bit different. So we're going to talk about positive externalities of consumption first. This is the consumption of a good or service that generates a positive effect on a third party or on society as a whole. Examples of these are underconsumptions of merit goods, education, healthcare, vaccines, walking, biking. So if you look at the positive externalities of consumptions, we'll look at this and we'll analyze the graph a little bit. There are certain goods or services which when consumed will provide benefits to third parties. Healthcare is a great example for this. But because of this, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal private benefit. So a lot of times the government will have to do some kind of action to help out. Because people will only consume at Q1P1, the marginal private benefit. So there will usually be some type of government actions. So if you look at this right here, in this graph, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal private benefit. The social benefit equals the private cost plus the external benefits. This will benefit society more than the private individual. So we are right here. We always start at the MPB or MPC. This is PE, QE. And then the marginal social benefit is greater, so that would be a rightward shift. And if you look right here, the always way to make the deadweight loss is you start at the intersection, the original intersection, and then you just do a dash mark up, which will create a deadweight loss triangle right here. For this one, supply equals MPC equals MSC. There's only one supply line, since this is looking at consumption. If the government is trying to equal the external cost benefit, then we say the government has internalized the externality. If they don't fully do this, then there's still going to be some deadweight loss, but it might be a smaller triangle. It's been reduced. Remember, taxes affect MPC, MSC. They are supply shifters. So we are going to be looking now at government responses. We are going to internalize the externality, internalize the externality, internal externality. Ha ha ha. So there are a plethora of government responses they can do. They could subsidize firms, which can encourage promotion of the industry at lower cost for firms, but it would cost money. They could do direct government provision, but there's going to be higher opportunity cost here, lack of expertise by the government. This could do crowding out. They could do positive advertisements, but there's high cost for this and high opportunity cost. And they could do compulsory legislation. So let's look at some examples of some graphs for this right here. So right here is education. For this right here, it was at D equals MPB. But what's going to happen is with positive education, we're going to see MSB equals MPB plus educational awareness. And this welfare loss would go away. Right here is an example of another thing. This would be granting a subsidy. A subsidy would affect supply, so this might not be fully allocatively efficient. But if you look right here, we wanted to be at Q opt with the new subsidy. It's right here. It's actually above that. But this will increase the quantity. It will keep the price relatively close-ish to where it should be. This is a way to do it, but this would affect the supply side. Direct government provision also would be another thing. This would also affect the supply side. So you'd have the same kind of thing happening right here. Because this is a consumption product, you're not exactly at allocatively efficiency. You have not fully internalized the externality. Legislation or advertisement. This does work. I mean, there are problems with it, like I said. For all these things, there are opportunity cost, but this would be a demand shift. It could be, at least. Next, we're going to talk about positive externality of production. This is the production process of a good or service that generates a positive effect on a third party or society. It provides public goods. Some examples are R&D research, beekeeping, flood defense systems, airport construction, building a new office, software development, and law and order. So when we're looking at this graph right here for positive externalities of production, they give external benefits when the production of a good or service creates external benefits that are good for third parties. This happens when the marginal private cost of the firm is greater than the marginal social cost. Firms would produce an output Q1, which is below the socially optimal level of Q star. So because of that, there needs to be some kind of government response to make to fix the externality, to internalize the externality. Let's kind of go into more depth about the graph right here. For this right here, the positive externality of production, as you see right here, the marginal private cost is greater than the marginal social cost. And you could tell it's greater just by doing little dash marks right here. It's at a higher price. The social cost equals the private cost plus the external cost. So it's going to have a greater cost in a private individual than society as a whole. What you do right here is you start at the MPC, and then you do the little dash mark downward, and this will give you a deadweight triangle. Some responses governments can do here is they could subsidize firms. It will encourage promotion, but it will also spend government money. The government could get in complete control, but this will have a high cost and opportunity cost. It could crowd out private businesses, and the government might not have expertise in this. Moving on. Here are some graphs that could show internalizing the externality. Right here, you have the graph. And what they did is the government did direct provision. So this is MPC. You could do MSC equals MPC plus government provision. Some people like to do their line in between to show that the externality has not fully been internalized. So they would do it right here, and that would create a smaller deadweight triangle. You could do that. It's really your choice. A subsidy you could do also. With the subsidy, it becomes a little spicy because you would actually draw the subsidy box as well on this. And, you know, if you're having trouble with the subsidy box, it's going to make things a little bit more difficult. But here you have the MPC, the MPB equals MSB. That's what you always label. You have a rightward shift for the subsidy, and then you would do the subsidy box. Let's talk about negative externalities of consumption. This is the consumption or good or service that generates a negative effect on a third party or society as a whole. This is overconsumption of demerit goods most of the time. Smoking cigarettes around others, dog ownership in apartments, driving vehicles with high carbon dioxide emissions, child obesity because of government medical spending, and litter. So for negative externality of consumption, the MPB is going to be greater than the MSB. This is when the consumption makes the marginal social benefits in each case less than the marginal private benefits. Private utility is diminished by the negative effects suffered by third parties as society as a whole. So like people who smoke presumably enjoy it, but this will create external cost for society as a whole. Let's kind of look at the graph right now and analyze it a little bit. For this one right here, you start with the supply, S equals MPC equals MSC. Then you have D equals MPB. Then you're going to do a downward left demand shift, and you're going to label this MSB. That's the marginal social benefit. It is less than the marginal private benefit. You'll do the little dash marks right here to get the deadweight loss or the welfare loss. Where the MSB and the MSC equal, that's the PSO or POPT, and QSO or QOPT, one of those two I would write. For this effect on society, the MSB is lower than MPB. Consumption is greater than what it should be. This good is over-allocated. Externalities of consumption focus on demand benefits. Therefore, MSC and MPC will always be equal. We've been seeing that back and forth for the things. In this right here, the marginal private benefits is greater than the marginal social benefits. So this will This will benefit a private individual more than society as a whole. Some of the things the government can do is they could do a Pigouvian tax. This is a tax on a negative externality, like cigarettes is a Pigouvian tax on demerit goods. This will increase the cost quickly, but it's going to be a supply shift, so it's going to be a little bit confusing. However, addictive goods are inelastic, so this will lead to black markets, and it won't necessarily push the demerit good as much. You could do regulations or bans. This will be reduced demand, low cost, but it could be slow to implement. It costs the government money, enforcing regulation. It could lead to anger from consumers. You could do negative advertisement, but this has high cost and opportunity cost, and we are not really sure how effective all these measures are. Here's the graph right here. We're going to show some government responses. This right here shows the demand of the private marginal private benefit, and this is the marginal social benefit equals marginal private benefit plus government regulation. So if you see right here, it has shifted. The welfare loss has gone away. That's welfare gain. We're at Q-opt and P-opt. And you could always internalize it where it's in between, like I said before. This one right here is a little bit more spicy. This is a tax, which is going to be a supply shift. But if you look at this graph right here, when they did do the tax, the Q-opt is going to be where it should be. Like these two things are this place. It is a little bit allocatively inefficient because the price is different of where it should be purely. And that's the same type of graph right there. Indirect tax. Lastly, we're going to talk about negative externalities of production. This is the production process of a good or service generates a negative effect on a third party or on society as a whole. Private firms do not take the additional costs onto society into consideration during production. Examples would be like air pollution, water pollution, loud noises generated, advertising clutter. So for negative externalities of production, this occurs when the production of a good or service creates external costs that are damaging to third parties. You see these a lot with like factories and the environment. The marginal social cost is going to be greater than the marginal private cost. It's going to hurt society as a whole more than the private individual. Firms are not concerned about the social cost, so they're going to be at P1 and Q1. P1 and Q1. So the government needs to internalize this externality by doing a response. So in negative externalities of production, the firm will only take into consideration their private benefit. The cost in society is much higher. The MPB is going to equal MSB. Remember, MPB equal D will equal MPB will equal MPB equals MSB. For this, the social costs are greater than the private cost. So it's going to have a greater effect on society than the private individual. In order to find the deadweight loss, you start where the MPC equals the MPB, the one demand line. Then you're going to do dash marks up to the MSC line, and it'll create a little cute deadweight triangle. Some of the responses governments can do for this is they can do laws and regulations. It could lead to cost of production increasing, unemployment. It could be expensive to enforce. They can impose a tax on this, but taxes could be difficult to measure and difficult to calculate. They could do tradable emission permits. When I said tax earlier, I meant specifically a carbon tax, although it could be other taxes. But for tradable permits, they could be difficult to set an acceptable level of permits, and they could be difficult to measure pollution. Permits are permissions to pollute permits that enforce a quota on emission. A lot of times we're able to sell these to other companies. Here, right here is a carbon tax and a tax. If you look right here in this graph, we have MPC, we have MPB equals MSB. Here's the deadweight loss. For here, MSC equals MPC plus tax. It does shift fully. They have internalized this externality. And when you're doing taxes, just like when you're doing subsidies, you do want to draw the tax box as well. on the externalities diagram. You could also do tradable permits. The tradable permit is a set amount, so it's a vertical line. But you could increase or decrease, which will increase or decrease the price of pollution permits. Lastly, we're going to talk about common resources, common pool resources. These are also known as common access resources or common property resources. When we're talking about these, we have to really look about whether it's excludable or whether it's riverous. So a riverous means when a good is consumed, it cannot be consumed by another person. Excludable means that something that you can exclude something else from using. One of the issues we have in common goods is the tragedy of the commons. If things are all non-excludable and non-riverous, it could completely lead to problems with sustainability or like a destruction of an ecosystem because there's no opportunity cost for using them. So sustainability is an issue that we focus on when we talk about goods. When we talk about common pool resources, tragedy of the commons. Sustainability is the ability of the present generation to meet its needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Governments do responsibilities to sustainability threats, carbon emission caps, carbon taxes, subsidies for clean and renewable technologies, collective self-governments, where stakeholders and consumers get together to resolve environmental sustainability issues. Sometimes businesses will do this. Also, international cooperation and international law, like the Paris Climate Accord, which the United States is currently not in, which is supposed to limit carbon dioxide emission. Let's talk about a last couple of terms to know. You should know a private good. A private good is a good that is riverous and excludable. This is something you own, like a banana, like my Coca-Cola, like my Monster that I'm currently drinking. A public good is goods that are non-excludable and non-riverous, like a street lamp, national security, firefighters. One of the problems we have here, especially with public goods, is the free rider problem. The idea that no one is willing to pay for non-excludable goods and services, and those individuals believe someone else will pay for them. Because of this, we do need a government, and the government needs to get involved. They need to create some kind of revenue through taxation to avoid the free rider problem, and they need to create public goods. So in most cases, the government will choose to provide public goods by using tax revenue. This helps solve the free rider problem, like I said. We also have quasi-public goods. These are goods that are excludable but non-riverous. This is an example of this would be a public museum that charges a fee or an uncongested tollway. This is also known as natural monopolies. So we're just going to talk about the 4 different types of goods here, just to get a little chart, a nice cute little chart right here that shows them. The first one we have is excludable goods. These are excludable, you have to pay for them, and they're riverous. When I get an ice cream, I pay for it, and there's less ice cream for everybody else. That's a private good. It's excludable and riverous. The next excludable one is a natural monopoly or quasi-public good. It is excludable for like fire insurance or cable TV. I have to pay for it. But by me getting cable TV, it does not affect you getting it. It's non-riverous. The next ones are non-excludable. We have common resources. Common resources are non-excludable, but they are riverous because us using it will affect other people. So the environment is non-excludable, but if I cut down a tree in the environment, there's less trees for everybody else. It is riverous. Fish in the ocean, a congested non-toll road. Lastly, we have public goods. Public goods are non-excludable and they're non-riverous. National defense, knowledge, uncongested non-toll road. I don't pay for this and it's uncongested, so me being in there does not affect anybody else. Whew. All right, kiddos, that is all I have for you for today. We are done with microeconomics review. We'll be starting macroeconomics in the next video. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, deuces, yeah.